Welcome to Straight Talk on Hot Topics. We are your master mentors, Zane Pierre, Katura Bartholomew, and Patty Sutton. Together, we will analyze trending issues through the lens of critical thinking, reason, and the wisdom of the sons of God. In each episode, we'll embark on a thought provoking journey navigating the complexities of current issues, societal needs, and pressing issues. Our aim? To bring clarity, perspective, and meaningful dialogue to the table. Good day to Zane and Katura.
Greetings,
Greetings.
greetings.
Hey
And
y'all.
we're gonna get like
Yes,
hot on it from the get-go. Y'all ready? Because
Yeah,
this is
let's
what
let's
we're
roll.
gonna do.
Let's roll.
We're gonna be here 28 minutes, period. Doom. And so if when you see us shut down, it isn't because there's something happened to our internet. It's because we're giving you 28 minutes and then we'll come back again another time. And then you'll want to follow us. You'll want to follow us so you can see
Indeed.
what happens next, because it is important and it's on what's happening in the world today. So the first topic that we want to talk about is Pride Month. So
whoa. That's one.
let's hit it hard.
That's
Let's
a
hit it
list.
going. Let's hit the ground rolling.
Now
So
when people
Pride
hear Pride
Month,
Month,
it's
now
like
when people hear
the rainbow and all the colors, and there's division, and it's like, what side of the road are we supposed to be on, and how are we supposed to respond to this? So what do y'all think?
well, I think that's a good topic because when people hear Pride Month, a lot of persons, some of the natural responses to turn up the nose, turn away, kind of shun that kind of thing. Somebody asked me recently, like, would I find myself in a position to like support like Pride Month? I'll just give my personal, like what I've learned so far, my personal thoughts, right? I have like friends and associates, family that actually identify with that community, the LGBTQ community. And so a lot of persons kind of find like, okay, so how do you interface with them? And I'm like, it's no difference to any other human being. I mean, if you're looking at it, like you're seeing the person by their chosen identity, you're like using that as a condition like to interface with them. I mean, those are just my thoughts on it. And so when I see persons who identify with whatever they may choose, even if it's transgender, it have persons who um adopt whatever pronouns, I see the heart and not their label. Just like you have a label, I'm a Trinidadian. That's a label I identify with within my community. For me, that's how I see that.
Gotcha.
What are your thoughts on that?
What are your thoughts on it, Zane, before I say mine? Do you have some thoughts?
So for me in particular,
I know you do.
I think that the society has gotten to a point. The society has gotten to a point where we should not even be speaking about what we support. Let me just start there. The society for a society to have gotten to a point of actually speaking about whether we support something or not, we are actually way past the line and way into the space of actually disrespecting each other.
Like
For
we
me,
don't have a choice.
for any society to thrive, yeah, we have actually passed the line of respect, and we have. Well, let me just back up a little bit so I can actually just lay a foundation for a small foundation for our listeners. For any society to thrive in particular, like all society in particular is pretty much constructed by the presence of some sort of legal system. And the presence of the legal system ideally is to establish justice. And justice, we can see that justice is what we would also call equity. And in most cases in particular, we have had legal systems in particular that has abandoned their true focus or its purpose, and it's actually the legal system in itself has actually stepped into biases. So where's bias start? The bias starts where there's equity, let's start with equity. Any legal system in particular, any construct of constitution and legislations in particular, establishes equity by first identifying everyone as the same. And the personal choices of the citizenry, the government in particular, should never get involved in it. Things began to go downhill in our modern day westernized society because governmental bodies decided to begin to implement titles in the legislations that should not have been there, because for equity to exist, there must be identification. Everyone has to be seen as the same. So we move from saying that everyone is a citizen, and now we implement in terms in the laws other titles, which actually gives preference to these titles above the rest of the citizenry. If everything remained equitably, then everybody could actually accept that we are citizens and respect each other's choices. And that doesn't mean that we need to support each other. We can just show respect, just as they choose that, we choose this. Because if we actually say if we should support them, the question as to whether we should support them comes from a point of superiority. It comes
So
from a
what
place
you're
where
saying,
our perspective is accepted. Now we have to choose if we accept this.
so what you're saying, like the legislation, gave persons titles. Like, what do you mean by that? What titles you talking about?
Well, like even the Pride Month is something that's
So when it
brought forth by the government, right? It's like they're putting labels on something and saying, don't you see it that way? Do you
Right.
see it that way? That they're separating a certain people group and saying we're going to honor this
governmental
group.
bodies.
Yeah.
So when legislations are established, as I mentioned just now, the presence of legislation should actually represent justice. And justice is actually making sure that everyone in a society has equity. That means that you have equal rights and equal privileges. For that to happen, everybody should be identified by one category. It started like that. Everybody identified as citizens. The moment governmental bodies get involved and they begin to actually incorporate other titles such as Pride Month or come up with legislations that actually give any particular section of the citizenry some sort of recognition, what they've just done is exalted that section, and the rest of the citizenry is at a disadvantage. Because when they actually establish the legislations for that section of the citizenry, they don't have a title for the rest of the citizenry, which means that the legislations that have actually been established for this particular section or segment of the citizenry places the rest of the citizenry in service to that section.
Whether
It was
it's
actually done.
whether it goes along with their moral
if they attempted
compass
to
or
create
not.
any sort of equity, the process is incomplete. Whether it agrees with that or not.
I think there's a bit of
See,
delay.
at the foundation
what
of
you're
every
saying.
of any
Yeah.
society, we must have
think you
legislation that
froze.
actually dictates what is the rights and what are the privileges.
Well, what do you think about
You hear me?
stores like, yeah, can you hear me? Stores like Target, which I don't know if y'all have a Target there, but in America we have a
No.
store named Target store, and they celebrate Pride Month, and then they have a transgender department, I guess maybe, that they're selling clothes, and it's like they are grooming kids is what is out there on social media, that Target and some of these other businesses, it's not even government, it's businesses that are trying to show inclusion by having apparel and things like that that are geared toward transgender and that type of thing. And so what do you think about that? Do you see that as they're grooming our children, or do you think there's a place for that in a general store that's for the general public? Do you think believers or Christians should boycott a store because they cater to this community, the LGBTQIA plus community?
I think. Well, let me just check before I respond.
So
Zane, are
if
you
we
hearing us?
go ahead.
I'm wondering if we still
Yeah.
have that delay. Okay. So I think, like, with respect to the boycotting aspect of it, I mean, this is just my thoughts on it, right? As I reason it, I personally won't boycott a store because they are in support of another community. Because it boils down to one of the reasons I have found that these communities even find it necessary to put a label to what they're doing is because, or to who they are gathering to be, is because they have not actually been treated with equity in the community itself. So it's just like a lot of persons have their biases against the LGBTQIA plus community, right? But then what about those who are also differently abled? They have a label attached to their names as well. And the reason why they have like disability month, autism month, all these different things is because these these different communities in our community at large are not also being treated as a citizen of equal rights. It comes down to what you were saying a while ago, Zane, where okay, so the government shouldn't get involved, but now because their voice for equity hasn't been heard, they have to now come together and form a community. And they're using targets in these different places. To me, it's insignificant, and this is my thoughts on it. Whether they use whatever brand name store it may be, unless this community is oppressing another, like um like they're actually going out there and killing people, or murdering, and doing things that are actually threatening the life of another person. I think that is well, it may be insignificant, at least to me. I would still shop there.
What do you think about them saying they're grooming our kids? So it's like they're showing our kids that this is an acceptable and a even admirable pride. I mean, you call it pride, an admirable lifestyle. What do you
Well,
think of that?
well, I have kids, and we don't. Sorry,
If
go ahead, Zane.
if we consider the concept of equity here, if we consider the concept of equity here, equity will dictate that is what is good for one is good for all, and what is good for all is good for one. Therefore, just by that standard, if we're actually creating sections in stores like Target to facilitate this community, then that means if it is good for one, it's good for all. Then all stores will need to identify all segments in the society to maintain equity and make sure that there's a department in every store for every group in the society. If that is not being done, then yes, what you're doing there is actually imposing your will upon the citizenry, and they're actually doing it with a very biased argument.
What is that biased argument?
Because basically what's taking place is that the biased argument here in particular is the fact that what we are attempting to do is to include that as a baseline and not something that is actually people can actually choose to get into and leave. We are treating this entire group here as though this is the whole argument that you're seeing online is actually trying to use their group as a model for what humanity is. But if that is the case, then all humanity should be like them, which means you're trying to impose an argument into a space and dominate the space by force and not from a position of equity.
So would you boycott shopping
Does that
at
make sense?
Target, Zane, if you were in that position?
I will boycott no one, really, because that's the decision of that organization. That organization in particular, they are to manage their affairs. But for me to say that I'm boycotting something because these people are actually doing that, what we actually allowing them to do, instead of actually taking the perspective of identifying where the impositions are taking place, taking the position of boycotting anyone because of these decisions is not going to solve the problem. All you're going to do is actually place pressure on people that may have a particular perspective, and now we are being inequitable to them because they have the right to make that decision as well. Because when it comes down to it, any legal system, as I mentioned, should represent equity, which means they should respect the power of self-determination of all the citizenry. But again, the government has actually placed themselves into positions that actually cause this entire problem. It is governmental interference in the issues of the citizenry that has actually caused this entire catalyst, because they included in the laws segments of the society that should not have been involved in what we call a legal system.
This
Because just as they
Target
have
store,
their
for
choice
example.
of sexual orientation,
sorry.
everybody else does.
It's delay.
Go ahead.
That's why.
Sorry. Like the Target store, though, they're not government. They're an independent brand, and so they can make their own choices. And have you ever heard of this? It's called IDA or something like that, or it's DEI. It stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's an agenda to and what I have that I took some notes from some
Right.
stuff I was reading and trending things that are trending, and it says it appears to complete abandonment of its long-held Christian values. So, like, if it could be seen as, I mean, because this has this sexual overtone to it. I mean, it has to do with your sexual preferences, right? That community,
Right.
the LGBTQIA plus, and so having that in a general merchandising store where children go and all people groups go to shop, is it and if it's something that goes against your Christian ideology, your Christian values, is that something that you think that you should take a stand on? Do you think you should say, I don't want my children to be exposed to this?
I think for me, if it's actually when
Well, there's a technical difference between the idea.
sorry, I don't know who to speak.
Sorry, that's the big delay again.
We have a delay thing, people. Sorry about that.
Yeah. It's all right.
We're not trying to be rude to each other. We just really love each other. We would never do that. We have some
When it comes-
comments. Do y'all want to read those?
Yeah, we see Vince wrote, thing I found disturbing with the line Target
Yeah.
had is they were advocating violence. They had pins with a Morning Star weapon similar to mace and guillotine. Thing to consider is that you're supporting a certain type of tree thought, which will
So let me
multiply
just
thought.
respond. So just allow me
ahead.
to respond to what Holy Sister Patty just indicated there. There's a difference between boycotting. There's a difference between actually making a decision and say you're boycotting, which is something in particular that is seen from a societal perspective. It is actually seen as a course of action in a very, even though it is actually not included in legal processes, but it is actually seen as something that is antagonistic in that on that level. This is why I'm saying that I would not say that I'm going to boycott anyone, but if we actually look at it from a perspective of equity here and respecting the self-determination of all, then just as they have actually made the decision to do that, then I have the right to indicate where I am comfortable to go and where I'm not comfortable to go. And if you have made a decision that is something that's made me uncomfortable based on what I have chosen to identify with and represent in my personal life, then if I'm not comfortable with what you have there, I'm not going to go there. But I want to make a differentiation here between what we consider boycotting and actually just not going there because it's not something that you're comfortable with anymore. The idea of boycotting is actually a strong message that actually has different implications. Does that make sense?
What are the implications that it says?
So when we're looking at the idea of boycotting again, most of the things that we're speaking about, the questions that we're asking is, do you support this? are we thinking about boycotting? These concepts, these perspectives come from a perspective that there is a predominant understanding in the nation as to what the nation predominantly holds itself to. Now, we could say that these nations in particular represent Christianity, but simultaneously they're removing the Bible out of schools and organizations. They're removing anything that is related to Christianity out of the realm of the offices and so on, which means there's a double message taking place. And that means that the society, the state in and of itself has to make a decision. They're not making decisions. And so now the believers who may have understood that this is a Christian nation, a Christian society, with the removal of the elements that represent Christianity, it's now created a space where there is an insecurity, and is now allowing others to come up with arguments to try to dominate what does the nation really represent. And so if you're removing things like the Bible and elements of Christianity from the nation, then you're leaving space for people to actually come there and say, okay, well, since there's no predominant belief system that the nation is holding itself to, we should have the ability to do this. But if, as I said, if you fall back on the legal aspect of what legislation is supposed to represent, which is justice, equity, then what is good for one is good for all. And if we're actually exalting this is no longer equity. And this is not an argument of discrimination. This is an argument as what is equitable, because if one is exalted, then all should be given the opportunity to exalt themselves as well.
So you're saying that if it is this community is getting certain privileges, then every other community, regardless of so when I say every other community, I mean, let's say the Autistic Society or the disabled community or even other religions should have the same privileges that this community is given.
Everybody.
Well, the thing is like in the States, we have a different month for different things. I mean, we have Autism Month. We do have that. We recognize Breast Cancer Awareness Month. There's different people groups, I guess you could say, that are recognized by the month. And so in that regard, it is equitable, I guess, because you're doing that for other groups too. based on that logic, right?
Yeah, but if we're applying that logic, then are these other groups given the right to do what they are doing, which is to actually now impose your perspectives into the literature that the children have to study? Is it actually occupying the education of the children, for example?
Yeah, I think it is.
Because those groups exist, but they don't have literature.
Yeah, they do. It's like there's an awareness, and then they have their colors, and all is the same as this LGBTQIA. It's not really the rainbow, but it's a 6 colors, I think, that represent them. And it's like Breast Cancer Awareness Month. They have the pink and everything, and even the football players, they wear pink because of in recognition of breast cancer awareness. And so it's like following the same line, but it's a different. The point in it, I think, is that it's a different. What causes Christians a problem, I believe, is the morality of the group. It's a morality issue, I think, more so than it is a separate group.
So that then therefore falls back on the whole idea of equity, that you respect the self-determination of others, and if there are people that actually don't want that, then their right to say that and their freedom to say, well, I'm not comfortable with that, should be respected as well.
Mm-hmm.
But to a great extent, that's not taking place. Those that are actually stepping up in the LGBTQ community or in that space, there's an imposition, as in there's an expectation that you have to accept us, whilst the rest are not functioning with that.
Right. I see that too.
So
do you
it's
see
like,
that, Katura?
Right? Everybody should have the freedom.
It makes sense what he's saying.
Go ahead.
It makes sense because you're basically saying that You know, in Trinidad, part of our national anthem, there's a part that says, "And every creed and race has an equal place." Right? I'm not the best of singers, and what I'm hearing in that is
Right.
that basically, if I choose to be a Muslim, if someone chooses to be an atheist, if another person chooses to be a Buddhist, then I'm just using religion here as opposed to the LGBTQ, right? Every religion, so to speak, should have the same rights from what I'm hearing. In other words, they should have the same freedom, whether you are a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, an atheist, to express yourself in your clothing or whatever it is you choose and feel safe within your country.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, where the clothing departments should, well, I wouldn't say should because the clothing departments are independent organizations, they're not government run, but they also have the right to choose what they want to support and what they don't want to support. Just like a Christian clothing store, you won't go in there and expect to find Muslim garbs, for example, or you wouldn't find Buddha on the wall. So everyone, what I'm hearing from what Zayn is saying is that every
Right.
community has their right to choose what they want, what they stand for, and what they don't stand for. Where it becomes oppressive is where now this chosen group tries to force their thought processing on the entire nation. We're supposed to basically coexist in peace, and that's not limited to religion now. We're expanding that towards sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you choose to be a transgender, that's your personal choice, fine. But now, if you choose to be a I guess I have to say a normal person or whatever it is, then that's fine. But if I now decide to push that, because that's now an agenda I'm pushing on all schools of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, and say everyone has to become aware of me. This is now where I am now trying to make my orientation more important than everyone else's. Is that what you're saying with equity, Zane?
100%, because equity is supposed to actually protect the self-determination of our citizens. And the power of self-determination means that you have the right to choose and to not choose something.
And it's like in the
And if
schools.
everybody else in particular has the right of self-determination, then to actually function through to actually function from the right of self-determination, what most people don't teach and bring an awareness of in a society where we're talking about equal rights and equal freedoms, is that to steward a right and a freedom requires